Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast of clinical trials. My name is Corinne Pettit, and I will be your moderator for tonight's presentation. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. This means if you can hear music through your computer, you should be able to hear the presentation. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address as many as possible at the end. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to take a moment to tell those of you who may be new to the Foundation about who we are, our mission, and what we do. The National Psoriasis Foundation is the world's largest nonprofit patient advocacy organization dedicated to psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, and we serve as the voice for millions of Americans who are affected by these diseases. Our mission is to drive efforts to cure psoriatic disease and improve the lives of those affected. In order to move our mission forward, we engage thousands of volunteers around the country in activities that will lead to a cure. For more information about these opportunities, log on to our website after today's program at psoriasis.org. One of the ways we move forward is through our Patient Navigation Center. Our team of patient navigators can help you find specialists, access medication, and connect you to others in your community who are living with psoriatic disease. I'm excited to announce that our Navigation Center is offering free health insurance quick guides throughout open enrollment to teach individuals the basics about health insurance and how to pick the best plan to save money on prescriptions and other health care services. To take advantage of this opportunity, please visit the link at the bottom of the slide or call 1-800-723-9166. Finally, I would like to thank our sponsors, Celgene, Dermira, Promeus Pharma, and Novartis for making tonight's presentation possible. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Andrew Blauvelt. Dr. Blauvelt is a board-certified dermatologist with a distinguished career ranging from leading basic scientific research at the National Institute of Health to establishing and directing the Center of Excellence for Psoriasis and Psoriatic Arthritis at Oregon Health and Science University. In addition to his overall clinical skills on the full range of dermatological conditions, Dr. Blauvelt's clinical and laboratory research expertise is in psoriasis, immunology, and infectious diseases. He has published more than 140 papers and spoken across the country and world on these topics. Dr. Blauvelt has also served as principal investigator on numerous psoriasis and other dermatological clinical trials, is a key scientific advisor for numerous pharmaceutical companies involved in developing new psoriasis treatments, and is a longstanding member of the Medical Advisory Board of the National Psoriasis Foundation. He is also an elected member of the International Psoriasis Council. Welcome, Dr. Blauvelt.
Thank you very much, Corinne. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope that you will be able to learn something about clinical trials. To me, this is an exciting topic and an exciting way to access some of the best medicines for psoriasis. So, can I advance? Thank you. So the first two slides, I just wanted to tell you, list a little bit more about my current background. I actually am in charge of a research center now called the Oregon Medical Research Center. And this is a study center in Portland, Oregon that only does clinical trials. So we're exclusively doing clinical trials. We're not doing clinical practice at all. Even though I am a dermatologist, I don't see patients with insurance at this research center. So we solely do studies in psoriasis and eczema and in a wide variety of other dermatologic diseases. We've been around for a long time, since 1998, almost 20 years. We have 2 other dermatologists that work with me, along with 13 full-time staff members. We're actually one of the biggest centers in the country, and we're capable of doing all kinds of research from both the very earliest stage research we call phase 1, all the way up until drugs have gotten on the market and are still being studied, and we call those phase 4. So this is what I do. This is what I do every day. So this topic is really near and dear to my heart. And because of this job and what I do now, I've seen so many, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands of psoriasis patients over the last 10 or 15 years that have benefited greatly from clinical studies. So I've seen it firsthand with my very eyes, and could have hundreds of testimonials for you about the people that have benefited from the clinical studies done at our organization. All right, so before we go into studies in particular and what it's like to be in a clinical study, I first want to talk about psoriasis and try to what I call debunk some of the common myths about psoriasis. And I'm saying this because many times people who come thinking they want to do a study or not sure, they have lots of doubts. They have lots of doubts and lots of fears about being in a study. And so one of the first things I do when I meet folks is I try to debunk fears and myths about psoriasis. So the first one I have up here is that psoriasis is just a skin disease. And we know from many years now of evidence that psoriasis goes much beyond the skin. And the NPF has actually had a popular program over the last several years labeled psoriasis is more than skin deep. And so what do I mean by that? Well, there's a lot of other conditions associated with psoriasis. And one of the biggest and most serious one is heart attacks and stroke. And we know that inflammation in the skin can lead to inflamed blood vessels and to the development of heart attack and stroke. And of course, this can lead to a shortened lifespan. And we know that folks with psoriasis will have up to 5 years off of their life, or a shortened lifespan of 5 years, if their disease remains untreated. So for those of you who have psoriasis, for those of you who have family members with psoriasis, this is the bad news. I mean, the good news is the next thing I'm going to say, but the bad news is psoriasis is a serious health condition. You should not think of it as just a skin problem per se. The skin is just a window. It's just a window of what is going on inside. So that's a really important message, and I'm going to go over some other evidence and data to show you that this is so. The second thing is the good news. The good news is that there are so many outstanding medications now for psoriasis that are not dangerous and highly effective. And I often hear that, oh, those new medicines, they'll kill you, they'll give you cancer, they'll cause severe infections. I would never go on one of those. Well, that is just not true. It's just not true with the newer medicines. In fact, the newer medicines are very targeted to the skin, and much more targeted to the skin than they are compared to older medicines. And this actually makes them more effective and more safe at the same time. And I like to call these drone strikes because it really is very specifically targeting psoriasis without leading to, if you will, collateral damage to the rest of the body, as the older medicines tend to do, which don't work as well and tend to cause more problems with the immune system. So if you haven't looked at this in a while, if you've looked at these medicines, these biologic medicines in 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you need to look again. Look at them again, because the newer ones are much better than the ones we've seen in the past. All right, next slide. So now I'm going to give you actually some evidence, some visualizations of what I just told you about. So here's a graph where we see patients with mild, moderate, and severe psoriasis, and the risk of heart attack and stroke goes, and it shows it going up the more psoriasis you have on your body surface area. So we see it's almost a twofold increase in your risk. It's a 1.8-fold increase in risk for those who have more than 10% of their body covered. And this is a risk for heart attack, actually, specifically in this slide. So this is the evidence. This is some of the proof of what I was just talking about. Now, why is that the case? Now, I mentioned to you that it can be due to inflamed blood vessels. But actually, when we look at special scanning inside the body, and this is called, it's a fancy name, it's a fancy kind of CT scan or CAT scan, where we can detect inflammation in the body. What we see in a psoriasis patient that's untreated is inflammation in many areas inside the body that are inflamed, including the arteries. So the big sort of tubes that you see in the thighs of the patient on the left are the arteries, and they're black compared to the right-hand side because they are inflamed. We also see inflammation in the liver and joints, and in addition to seeing inflammation in the skin. And we also know that this picture, this kind of picture with a CAT scan, looks worse when patients have more lesions on their skin. If they have fewer lesions on the skin, then we see less inflammation inside. So it's a very simple kind of correlation that the more psoriasis you have on the outside, the more inside inflammation you have, the more risk for heart attack, the more risk for problems, more risk for inflamed liver, joints, and other tissues. If you have just a tiny bit of psoriasis, it's not as much of a big deal. You will have less going on internally. So I actually like to flip the equation here because of what I just told you. Instead of making a big warning, what we call a black box warning for the medications and all the horrible things that medications can do to patients, in the case of psoriasis, I like to flip that and saying not using a biologic medication in psoriasis can lead to these problems, these very severe problems. And so what I'm trying to say is that the risk of the disease is worse than the risk of the newer medicines. So untreated psoriasis is risky to your health. So doing nothing is worse than doing something with one of the newer biologic medicines. So long ago, back in the 70s, there was this Denerex, I think, ad calling the heartbreak of psoriasis. And so now we know it's true that psoriasis patients can get heart disease, and it's associated with the extent of their skin psoriasis. All right, I'm going to go back now and talk more about the medications, and I'm going to actually give you some details about the medications. So the bottom line here in this slide is to show you that is what I say at the top of the slide. The top of the slide, I say that better science on psoriasis has led to better treatments for the disease. And so this is a really, really direct correlation with, as our understanding and our research on psoriasis has improved over time, which is shown on the left, it has led to direct results, positive results of developing of drugs that are now much more targeted to the skin. And we see in orange at the bottom what I call the new biologics. So these are the actual names: ustekinumab, secukinumab, ixekizumab, brodalumab, guselkumab, and ones to come, Tildra and Risen. So of this new list, actually 5 of them are on the market. So when I talk about the newer medications being great, I'm talking about the 5 medications in the lower right-hand corner. Here's another way of putting it. We've gone through different generations of biologics, and they've been going on now since 2002, or 15 years now. And what you see are, what I have here are response rates, or the percent of people who are actually doing well on the drug. And what we see very clearly is that with each generation, with each family of drugs, we've improved the responses to much better levels. And then I put in box here some of the other, actually in the box are the pills. These are pills for psoriasis, which have much lower success rates compared to the injectables or the biologics. And as I mentioned earlier, the 3rd generation biologics, because they are so targeted to the skin, are associated with far fewer side effects than 1st generation, 2nd generation, and the pills in the box. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit different thing now. So I'm going to talk about being clear, having completely clear skin. So this is actually a concept that we can achieve now. We can actually get people to have 100% clearance of their skin. And what we see in this slide is as people get 100% clear, we see their quality of life going up. So on the far right, 85% of patients who have completely clear skin have an excellent quality of life. And you can see on the other end, if people have less than 50% clearance of their skin, they have the poorest quality of life. So what I'm saying here, again, is if you can get to 0, you will have the best health and the best quality of life. And now the National Psoriasis Foundation is getting on board with this new idea that you should really be at 0 or close to 0 as possible. And actually we put out a paper earlier this year that says that every dermatologist now should try to get their patients to a body surface area of 1% or less. That's 1 palm of psoriasis or less as the treatment goal really for every single patient. Now, a few years ago, we couldn't even imagine this kind of goal. But as I mentioned, with these newer medicines, we're achieving this goal on many of our patients. Many of our patients now are getting to this recommended goal. And I like to say that psoriasis plaques are like cockroaches. You wouldn't tolerate 1 cockroach in your kitchen, so why should you tolerate a single plaque? Because when you see one, it's a sign that there's more to come. There's more that could come up. So even a single plaque is a sign that you have inflammation in the body that's not completely abolished. So think of each one of those spots as things you really should try to get rid of. Okay, so going back now to clear skin. So why should I care? I mean, a lot of folks say, well, I'm okay with my skin. I've learned to live with it. I've accepted my psoriasis. Well, there's data and facts are that if you clear your skin, you actually have the best quality of life. It's now the guidelines for many care. It's what's talked about as being the best kind of care. And because now we have the proper tools in the toolbox, so to speak, to help you get to that level. All right, so now with that background, I'm going to talk about clinical trials. And the reason why I did it this way is that many patients, many people with psoriasis don't have access to the newer medicines. They either have no insurance or they have poor health insurance that does not allow them to get one of those newer medicines. So this is a pretty common problem. So the problem with the medicines is not so much the medicines themselves, it's trying to get them. And that can be a problem. So trying to get them can be a problem. So getting in a trial sometimes may be the only way to get treatment. The medication is free. It's often the cutting edge treatment. Often it's just as good or sometimes even better than what you can get through your insurance. The care is free. And often the dermatologists doing trials are experts at psoriasis. So it's another excellent advantage of being in a trial. Patients also like to participate because they feel like they're making a contribution to the advancement of knowledge and science in psoriasis, and that is true, they are. We can't do new medicines if people don't volunteer for trials, participate, and have that data to go to the FDA. And you're also paid to be in the trial, but it's usually a small stipend. It's meant to be such as like a thank you note or contribute to travel costs. All right, so not everything about a trial is perfect, and not everything about a trial is great. So some studies, not all of them, have the possibility of having a placebo treatment for a limited time at the beginning of the study. And what is that? Placebo is a fake medicine. So if we're doing a biologic trial, some patients may have the possibility of receiving water shots instead of medication shots at the beginning of the trial. Now, one important thing is that this is often followed by a period of time where all patients receive the active drug. So if you get unlucky at the beginning, and this is only a subset of patients and only in some studies, if you get unlucky and are on a placebo, there often is the possibility to go on the active drug after that short time period. And the time period can be, it's usually about 3 months. Sometimes it's 4 months, but 3 to 4 months is really the longest possible time that you would have to go in many studies. It also takes more time to be in a clinical trial. So it's more time than a regular visit to the doctor. So those of you who are really busy, crazy lives, it does take time away. You know, an average visits can be an hour long, sometimes even 2 hours long if a lot is being done on a particular day. So you have to be committed to this. You have to allow the time for it if you're going to do it. The other thing, there are rules. There are lots of rules in each trial. And we need that to be able to have everybody on the same page so we can actually evaluate the effects of the drug. So one of the main rules is that no other treatments are allowed, and that you have to wash out of your previous treatments or get them out of your body or out of your system prior to entering in a trial. So this can be very difficult, especially for patients who come off a drug and then have a bad recurrence of their disease. So these are the main drawbacks of trials. So you notice I didn't put safety on here. I really, really don't think that safety is an issue with clinical trials because there's so much emphasis on safety in every single trial. And I actually think it's safer to be in a trial than it is to be treated through a doctor's office because there's so much emphasis on it. We're watching you like a hawk, and we really are on top of things the entire time. So I think a myth that trials are unsafe, and I really think it's the opposite. They're actually safer. All right, so just a couple more comments. Participating in a clinical trial is nothing like dermatology practice. So in a dermatology private practice, you go in, you are the customer, and you are paying, or your insurance is paying, In a drug study, it's the pharmaceutical company who is paying for everything. So they are paying you, they're paying for the drug, they're paying me, they're paying for the whole trial to be done. That's just how it's done. They're the ones that are putting forth the medicines. Now, they're under lots of regulations. So drug companies just can't do willy-nilly whatever they want in a trial. Trials are highly regulated by the FDA and by federal laws. The companies have to abide by standards, ethical standards, and every study is reviewed by a local ethics board and has to be above board in all aspects. We have to treat every single study patient with a high level of ethics, with high level standards. There's no shadiness going on in any trial right now in the US. So as I mentioned, safety is the #1 concern of all clinical trials. Flat out true statement. Now, the rules need to be followed, as I mentioned, by everyone. The rules not only are being followed by the patients, but I have to follow the rules, my personnel has to follow the rules, and the drug companies have to follow rules to do a clinical trial. So it really is not a conspiracy. It's not a secret thing. You're not going to be having any crazy stuff done to you that's not allowed through a number of folks looking over the shoulder, basically. All right. So right at the beginning, I mentioned that my business does phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 trials. So what does that mean? So phase 1 trials means that the drug has just come out of the laboratory. It's just been created, and it's the first time a drug goes in a human being. Now that definitely is more scary than the bottom type of trial or a phase 4 trial. So phase 1 trials are usually in a very small group of people, and usually they're healthy volunteers, and usually they're getting paid a lot of money to be in that trial, because really it's about whether the drug is safe, and the testing is really about safety and not at all about whether it works or not. So it's usually done in young, healthy volunteers. On the other end of the spectrum, the phase 4 trials are drugs that are actually FDA approved and they're on the market. And we want to answer some question about the drug, and so another study is done. So those are actually the best trials. So you think about that, you'd be getting a free drug of a drug that's not experimental, it's on the market, and those are called phase 4 trials. The next best thing is a phase 3 trial, because phase 3 trials, basically the drug has been shown to be safe in phase 1, effective in phase 2 trials, and now phase 3 is in a much larger group of folks right before FDA approval. And sometimes these studies can last a long time. They can last 5 years. So at my business, the most popular trials are actually phase 3 trials, because if it's a terrific drug, it's people's chance to get it before it's on the market, and sometimes free for up to 5 years. So those are really, really a terrific kind of trial. So the purpose of this slide really is to get you guys to understand that all trials are not the same. You can't just say, oh, clinical trials, that's a guinea pig situation. That really is what I would describe. A guinea pig situation is more of a phase 1 trial. And most of the trials that are available for psoriasis patients are phase 3 and phase 4 trials. It's not a guinea pig situation. We know a lot about the drugs when they reach the phase 3 or phase 4 trial stage. All right, so let's say you want to do a trial. You're interested in finding out more. How can you do that? So you can ask your dermatologist. They may not be forthright. they may not want to tell you about a trial because they may want to keep you in their office. So just know that your dermatologist may not be the be-all, end-all to give you what you need to know. You can sometimes find out directly advertisements. You know, study sites like us, we advertise in the newspaper, on radio, billboards, on our website. The NPF, the National Psoriasis Foundation, can also be a source for identifying trials. And then there's this website called clinicaltrials.gov, and it is a database for every single clinical trial going on in the United States. And I'm going to show you the website. This is what it looks like. So you can just type in clinicaltrials.gov, and you get to this page. And then under search, you can see I've typed in psoriasis. And then you can type in other terms, like if it's a particular drug you want, or you can type in a region of the country, and you get the answer for what is going on right now in your area. So a really, really useful website. There's another useful website, and this is the NIH Clinical Trials Clinical Trials and You website. And here there's just a load of information. There's so much information about clinical trials on this website. You can learn all about the basics, finding a trial. You can hear about personal stories of people that have been in trials. There's just a lot of information here, and I would encourage you, again, if you want to know more, to look at this website as well. So in summary, I've told you a lot of things today, but I want you to really kind of take home some basic information. The first thing is that psoriasis is a significant health issue. It should not be ignored or undertreated. What do I mean by undertreated? That means you should try to get to zero, or you should try to get complete clearance of your skin. If you're half improved and your dermatologist is telling you you're just fine, you're not just fine. So the current standard is for you to get to clear or just 1% of your body covered. So that's an important message. Ask about getting completely clear. The other important message here is that the newer drugs, the 5 newest drugs, are much more safe and they're much more effective than older drugs. And the newer ones coming in clinical trials tend to have this same kind of 3rd generation targeted profile, targeting down on the skin. So that's the good news. That's the good news for everyone, really, is that second bullet point. Participating in a trial, I didn't really actually say this already, but it can be fun, it can be exciting, and incredibly rewarding, especially if you can get onto one of the better drugs, the newer drugs that are being studied. Then it can really be a rewarding experience. As I mentioned, I have hundreds, if not thousands, of patients here, testimonials of those who have benefited from participating in a clinical trial. Now, the last point is that not every trial is going to be the same, right? I mentioned the different kinds of trials. Early stage, late stage, some that have a placebo at the beginning, some that don't. So if you can, try to pick and choose the best ones that interest you, the best ones for you. They're not always going to be the same. Again, you're going to want to try to look for phase 3 and phase 4 studies, because those will tend to be the very best ones for you. So the final thought is a picture of my father, who actually had severe psoriasis. And he actually participated in clinical trials for psoriasis before he passed away. So he actually passed away of a heart attack. And so this whole concept, this topic is really personal to me, and I really want people to, again, take psoriasis seriously. Would I recommend a trial to my father? Absolutely. To my best friend, to my spouse? Absolutely. they can have a tremendous impact on your lives and the lives of your loved ones. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to the MPF, and I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll stay around for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Blauvelt. We will now hear the patient perspective of a clinical trial from MPF Board of Directors member Pete Miller from Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, Corinne. Yes, I am a fortunate person who has been on a trial, a level 3 trial for about 15 months. And I want to tell you a little bit about that and my experience. I have had psoriasis for over 50 years. Developed it first about 13, 14 years old. Back in the day, we used pretty much, the treatments were pretty much tar-based, tar shampoo, tar cream. It was all awful. Yellow sheets, yellow hair, orange hair, you know, and it wouldn't really do the job. It helped a little bit until I found light therapy. I was pretty much a mess. Light therapy was particularly effective for me. PUVA and other light therapies, Sunshine. Palm Springs was a great place for me back in the day as well. But doctors have told me now that I've had enough sunshine, enough ultraviolet light, no more. So, and again, at the same time, I was hesitant to think of biologics because of the risk. And like many people, I was very wary of the risk. And I think there was some risk back in the day, you know, even 10, 15 years ago. However, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Blauvelt here in Portland, Oregon, and hear him speak several times. Developed a great appreciation, great respect for the man and his knowledge of psoriasis. And he explained to us many times how dangerous the inflammation can be and the various diseases and things that can cause over time. So I was determined I must do something, even at my old age here in my late 60s, early 70s, to counteract that inflammation in my body if I wanted to continue living a long life. So I approached Dr. Blauvelt, asked him what the chances of me getting in a trial. He explained it very thoroughly, and I signed on. I signed on, it was July, I believe it was July or August of 2016. I've been on a trial for, like I said, 15 months, and I am free of psoriasis, totally and 100% free. Talk about exciting, it's very exciting. Dr. Blauvelt is correct. I don't think I was just one of the fortunate few. The drug that I am trying, at least I think I'm on, is 90 to 95% effective, and I'm certainly one of the success stories. I got to tell you about the organization, at least Dr. Blauvelt's research, Oregon Research. It's very professional. Dr. Blauvelt, my first appointment, I came in, he talked to me before, but he spent nearly an hour with me explaining the entire process. He explained the risks, how the treatments have improved, how he would recommend this to his own family members. I felt really good about the process before I ever entertained an injection. So at that time, I began the trial. It's an amazing thing. I would go in about once a month for the first year. It'd be like getting a physical in fact, they pay you. I got, for my particular trial, $75 every time I went to the office. You go in, they take your blood pressure, they draw your blood, urine sample, EKG, That's all sent back east and evaluated very carefully. You feel like you're really they're really watching your health very carefully. It's a very professional process. It's a very rigorous process, like Dr. Blauvelt explained. There's very strict rules. The FDA watches them very carefully. Very professional office. You get treated so well, quite honestly, now I only go in about every 3 months now in my second year, and I almost miss the place. I mean, it's just, I've developed friendships there, and they share in my success, and it's really a great feeling. So I consider myself very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do this, to be in a clinical trial, and I would certainly do it again and recommend it to any of my family members. I have 2 children. Neither one of them have psoriasis yet, but who knows? It's in the family genes, and I would certainly recommend that to them. I certainly wish these advanced drugs had been around when I was younger. I think probably my self-esteem would be much more intact, and I wouldn't be wearing the scars of what psoriasis did to me. So with that, I guess we entertain questions.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Pete. So we'll now move into the Q&A portion of the webcast. Please submit your questions for either Dr. Blauvelt or Mr. Miller through the questions panel on your attendee interface. We will attempt to answer as many as possible in the remaining time. All right, so first question is for Dr. Blauvelt. What happens to me in my treatment plan after a clinical trial? If the trial drug is effective for me, how do I stay on that drug after the trial is over?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's actually another one of the downsides or drawbacks of a trial is that they do end. They don't go on indefinitely. So it's as Pete mentioned, I mean, we do develop these friendships over time, and sometimes it's a hard thing to, especially in a 5-year study, to break it off and say it's over. And we so what I do is I try to get folks the same medicine as they've been on in the trial, if possible, on the outside. And sometimes things have changed as far as health insurance or the rules or the ability to get it from the time they started when they couldn't get it to the end. Sometimes the drug's not even available at the start, and then it becomes approved during the trial, and then they can get it afterwards. So everybody's a little bit different, but my point is I just don't kick people on the street. I try to give them an easy landing and try to get them on the thing that they were on in the office. If not that, the next best thing. So, and then the third, or the second thing, if I can't get them, if they still don't have insurance or their insurance is still blocking it or something like that, I mentioned the possibility of another trial. So that we do have repeat customers that will go into another trial in the future. So, but I think the best thing though is to try to get people on the same medicine that they've been on.
Great, thank you. Next question here. Why do biologics seem to lose efficacy after a few years?
It's an excellent question. And I should say first that the newer biologics are better at that than the older biologics. So that's a pretty true statement for older drugs that were approved about 10 years ago. So I won't mention names, but some of the biologics that have been out for a while can lose effectiveness over time. And the main reason is that your body kind of develops a resistance to it and develops what's called anti-drug antibodies. And those antibodies actually help eliminate the drug quicker so that every time you get it, your body can react to the medicine and eliminates it a little bit quicker than the time before. So that's probably the main reason why people can develop resistance over time. But it doesn't happen in all patients. And some drugs are definitely, the older ones are more notorious for that than the newer ones.
Great, thank you. And next question here. Are there any clinical trials that can be remotely administered? There are none in my area.
That's a probable no. That's unfortunate. Yeah, that's so much. I get that question too about like laboratories. Can I get my blood drawn? Do I have to come in for my blood draw visit or something like that, or can I have my doctor send in my EKG? And the answer is usually no. It's one of the rules that everything has to be done on site. Now, I have to say, though, I do have people that come from a long ways. I have some that drive as far as 5 hours to be in a clinical trial. And I've had a couple of folks who have been in the trial and then moved away and fly back for their appointments so they can stay in. So a guy that lives in San Francisco and a guy that lives in Montana now, they fly in for their visits. So sometimes people go far out of their way to be in a trial.
Great, thank you. Next question here. What upper age do you recommend for clinical trials?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there an upper age limit recommended for clinical trials?
Yeah, usually there's not. Usually it's 18 and up. It's more rare to have psoriasis trials in children, although there have been a few over the years. Most of them are in adults, 18 and up. Occasionally we'll see an upper limit of age of 75 or so, but usually it's 18 and up.
Great, thank you. Next question here. Are there clinical trials for biosimilars?
There are. So biosimilars are, I call them generic biologics. So some of the older drugs like Enbrel and Humira and Remicade, the patents are expiring on those older medicines, Enbrel, Humira, and Remicade. And so what's happening is that generic drug makers are making generic versions of Enbrel, Humira, and Remicade, and those are they're not called generics, but they're called biosimilars, and they are being tested and studied now.
Thank you. Next question here. How often are the appointments for a clinical trial?
It's always more at the beginning, and then it always spreads out with time. So I would say at the beginning of a study, it can be sometimes weekly or bi-weekly visits for the first month, and then it's often once a month for a while, and then sometimes, as Pete mentioned, beyond 1 year, the visits are spread out sometimes to every 3 months. So that's a pretty typical thing to be weekly visits for the first month, or every other week for the first month, and then monthly, and then 4 times a year.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Next question. Can people in other countries join the test?
They actually can. You don't need to be an American citizen to be in a clinical trial in the U.S. We actually have had some Japanese folks, Japanese nationals, be in studies at our site. And it wasn't a study that lasted forever. It was a 4-month study. And so what these patients did is they came to Portland, and they got housing for 4 months, and they participated in our trial.
Thank you. Is there anything that would disqualify me from participating in a trial?
There are. As I mentioned, there's lots of rules. So if you have a common thing that disqualifies folks is a history of cancer, internal cancer. Skin cancer is usually okay, but if you've had internal cancer, especially in the last 5 years, that can often exclude you. If you have HIV, if you have hepatitis, those are common exclusions. Sometimes having been on one medicine will exclude you from a trial if the medicine we're studying is really close to the one that you were on. So if it's really similar, then sometimes they exclude people that were on similar medication.
We have a question for Pete here. Did you have to give up your primary dermatologist in order to be part of the clinical trial?
No, actually, I did not. Interestingly enough, though, about the same time that I decided to do this, my dermatologist was retiring. So it worked out fairly well, even though Dr. Blauvelt is not my actual dermatologist. He's recommended me to people that he knows and a person that he knows, and that is my dermatologist now. But no, you don't have to give up your dermatologist. In most cases, they agree with what you're doing. I think most dermatologists.
Right. I just want to add on that, Pete, that a lot of psoriasis patients may have had skin cancer because of the phototherapy, the light therapy, and they need regular skin cancer checks. And so that's not going to be the primary thing of the study doctor. So the psoriasis is going to be the main thing of the study doctor. And I usually recommend anyone that needs it, a skin cancer check be done by another dermatologist. As
and that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened to me. He's recommended another dermatologist to get my yearly skin check because I have actually had some basal cell issues.
Thank you. So another question here for Dr. Blauvelt. Are participants updated about whether a drug gets approved? How does a participant find that information?
Yeah, so once you're in a trial, it's an excellent question. Once you're in a trial, you get updated on everything. So let's say something bad happened, and what I mean by that, so a few years ago, there was a trial that ended in the middle of the trial, and it's because there were some patients that committed suicide during the trial. And it was very controversial over whether the drug had anything to do with the suicides because all the patients that committed suicide had psychiatric issues before they started the trial. And so, but because the company got very nervous about that, they decided to close the trial in the middle of the trial. So that's an example of if there are things happening around the world with the trial, you will know it. You will be informed. It is actually our obligation to tell you and update you on everything that's going on with that medication, including bad things, including good things. If there's good things happening, like an FDA approval, we'll be telling you that during the trial.
One thing I failed to mention was that my mental health was looked after as closely as my physical health. There were surveys, questionnaires every time I came in that would measure and make sure that I was emotionally fit as well as physically.
That's a good point, Pete. It's an important part of trials now. It's not just to focus on the skin, but to focus on the whole individual.
Great, thank you. Next question here. Are biologic drugs recommended for mild to moderate psoriasis?
That's an important pet peeve of mine, and I'm trying to get, so many people in trials, they have to have what's called 10% body surface area or 10% of their body covered or higher to get in. And then what we see when drugs are approved by the FDA is that insurance companies then make that a requirement before they will consider paying for these drugs. And so what happens is there are a lot of patients, folks out there who have more than just a few plaques. They might have between 5 and 10% or 5 and 10 palms. And technically they don't qualify for a study, and technically the insurance company will deny them. And I've been pushing for more research and more studies on those types of patients, that 5 to 10%, because I do think it's probably the best way to treat their psoriasis as well, is to go inside out instead of topical creams and ointments. Because topical creams and ointments can be fine for just a few areas, for 1, 2, 3% of psoriasis. But beyond that, it becomes very difficult, very hard to control. So there are people that are, in other words, kind of dropping through this donut hole of having a medium amount of psoriasis. And you might start to see more studies in those types of people.
Great, thank you. Once I've found a trial I'm interested in, what should my next steps be?
So what you do is you call the center and ask for a free, no-cost discussion about the trial. And that's what we do, and I think that's really important to kind of go to check something out before committing. So it is important to check it out, ask questions, see what drug is being studied, what's known about the drug, is it like others on the market, is it one of the newer types, is it an older type? You know, you need to really, before just signing on the dotted line. So I do not recommend that. I really do recommend that kind of a checkout visit, and you can do that on the phone as well. So on the phone or set up a consult visit like that.
Thank you. Next question here. Are we close to a cure for psoriasis?
Great question. And I know the MPF has been pushing for a cure for psoriasis, as I have been, and many people have been. And I think we're getting in the right direction, because if we can now clear 90% of patients to be 90% clear or 100% clear, we're getting really, really good. And I think that the next stage of development and the next advancement in the future is going to be, now that we have drugs that are really terrific at clearing skin, I think we're going to be seeing variations on those drugs to try to make them last even longer. So instead of one shot every 2 or 3 months, we can maybe in the future get into an area where we're doing one shot a year and have, you know, a big knockdown of psoriasis for a long period of time, and then maybe beyond that we can think about a cure. But I think we're going in the right direction.
Great, thank you. And we have time for one more question here. Does this information transfer to psoriatic arthritis trials?
It does, absolutely. There's lots of trials and activity in psoriatic arthritis as well. I don't do those trials because I'm not a rheumatologist, and so you may want to check out rheumatology centers or offices in your area. But I think also the MPF can help with that as well, and also clinicaltrials.gov. That website I mentioned, if you type in psoriatic arthritis, you can see what's available.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Blauvelt and Pete. And if you have any other questions or your question was not answered tonight, please contact our Patient Navigation Center by phone, email, live chat, or Skype. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. As a reminder, we want to thank our sponsors, Celgene, Dermira, Promira Pharma, and Novartis. And I just wanted to mention that a recording of tonight's webcast will be available shortly on our website, and you can access our complete webcast archive by visiting psoriasis.org/webcast. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.